So nice to see everybody. So go ahead and sit cross-legged on something. Add some height to your hips. Cross the shins one in front of the other. As you see Tristan's demonstrating, the feet are underneath the knee, not pulled close to your hip. It's not Sasana or Sukhasana. Flex the feet deeply, pulling the toes back, especially the pinky toe side of the foot. So you flex the knife edge, the outer edge of the foot. Press the foot hard into the floor. Press your hands in your thighs. Lift your spine up. Take a breath. Push your feet hard enough into the floor that you feel like your body's going to go back a little bit. Push your hands into your thighs again. Lift your spine up. Take a breath. Exhale, drop the shoulders. Take another deep breath. Press your hands down. Exhale, draw your back ribs in. Stretch your side rib forward. Lift your front rib up. Exhale, keep the ribs lifted, active. Let the eyes close. Take a few minutes, a few moments, I should say, minutes, not the exact time measurement. Take a few moments as you're here, just kind of breathe into your body. Be aware of that breath. Kind of take yourself back to square one, back to the start. All right, because there's nothing more symbolic of the start of our life than our inhale, our very first inhale. When we came forth. So let's kind of go back to the start there. Take that breath in. Feel the coolness of it. Feel the heat of your exhale. Feel the refreshing quality of the inhale. Feel the softening quality of the exhale. As you're sitting here, kind of be aware of all the stuff that also comes up with each inhale and exhale. I'm not saying make up things or imagine things, but just be aware of what comes through the mind. Those things that you're spending yourself on, even if you don't want to. The news, other people's worries or concerns, your own worries or concerns. Be aware of those things that come up that you don't want to spend your time, your energy on, but do anyway. Medically, we call it anxiety. In the yoga world, they're called chitti-vrittis, disruptions of the mind. And become aware of them and recognize for a moment that they may take up a lot more of your day or your life than you intend. Like a bad dream that leaves you exhausted when you wake up from sleep. All that anxiety, all that stuff, all those chitti-vrittis are like that. They're like a bad dream. Something we can't easily control. That takes their toll on us anyway. Exhausts us. And one thing I was told about bad dreams growing up, when I would have them, is my parent or grandparent say they weren't real, they can't hurt you. The not real part, I think, is the most important lesson there. Because those things that you hold on to, or those things that come through your mind or kind of keep happening without your control or your consent, they're not true. Especially those things that you might have picked up or believed about yourself. I've talked about before how yoga gets you to the bedrock of who you are. But you have to kind of see all the stuff that kind of keeps happening, whether you choose to believe it or not, in the way. Deep down, you know you're a happy person, but you're sad all the time. All your energy is going into being sad. And that's a lie. Because if the bedrock of who you are, if you are deep down a happy, loving, joyous person, but you keep feeling angry, sad, and unloving because you were taught to, you were told to, you never had the chance to heal from wounds given or stuff like that. Those are still just not true of who you are. Lots of people have told us in our lives like this. Every time I've said kind of a jerk or an asshole, Tristan or other people in my life go, no, you're not. Why would you believe that about yourself? I'm sure we've all got those. So be aware, my friends, of those things that are not the bedrock of who you are, and let your yoga practice reconnect you to those things that are true about yourself. Your dedication, your love, your passions. Recognize if those are true, all those other things that make you unhappy, that leave you exhausted, that won't be quiet, it must be the lie. That must be not truth. And even though it may take time to remove them, accepting that's what they are is the first step. Because if those are not true, then those things, the stories that you made up about yourself, can also not be true too. It's the false use of karma in our culture. Using it like, oh, well, it's retribution, I deserve this. Karma is not about retribution or justice. Karma is not a bitch. Karma is a movement of judgment, an example of what we get to believe and act upon, especially in ourselves. So let your practice, my friends, your practice of seeing that bedrock of who you are and that coming up. You may have to go through and combat some of the false things, the lies that we've picked up or practiced believing. So ultimately they go away. You stand firmly on that bedrock of who you are and build upon that everything you want for yourself and the world around you. Bring your palms together at your chest, thumbs touching your sternum. Spread your fingers apart slightly. We'll shortly 3 times and we'll begin. Take a breath. Oh. Flex your feet, push your feet down. Oh. Back rib in, side rib forward, front rib up. Oh. Bow your head. With the essence of yoga inside yourself. Bring your hands into your lap. Let your head rise. Your eyes open. All right, so nice to see everybody. A couple people snuck in, so good. So go ahead and grab your yoga blocks or your yoga block substitutes, both of them. You're going to take both blocks and lay them flat. Now, if you have books, you're just going to stack your books up until you have at least one stack about 4 inches high. You're going to take the 2 blocks or stack of books. You're going to lay them on the floor next to each other, off the board. And you're going to have a blanket or pillow that should start in the same height as those 2 blocks or your stack of books. So I folded this blanket up in thirds to get it roughly the same height. And that goes on the other end of the blocks. So don't get too excited, but it's kind of like restorative light mode. So you get to sit down on the floor with the blocks behind you. Watch Tristan for a second. Scoot away from the blocks. And you're going to lay back on the blocks so your shoulder blades land on the blocks and the back of your head is on the blankets. Your arms kind of hang in that space between the block and blanket. Go ahead, lay them there. And your arms just stretch out. Your arms don't lay on your chest. They don't go on your belly. You stretch your arms out so the blocks push your ribs up. Your shoulders hang down slightly and your head is supported. Go do that. Lay down. Don't worry, you're not going to get to fall asleep here or do anything crazy like that. I'm just going to We're going to continue the work we've been doing, opening the hips, working the legs, prepping our pelvis, hips and knees and back for seated poses. But, you know, there's a way to do it from a supine position that actually helps prep certain parts of the spine and the hips. When you do full lotus, you actually do it from a laying position at one point, but your arms are behind you and all this other stuff. So as you're here laying on your back, block or books under your shoulder blades, not below them, so they're not pushing your middle back, they're pushing your shoulder blade, your largest part of your chest bone up, your arms wide. So your head is at least level with your chest to start. If this is not enough, if you feel neck tension, feel free to fold your blankets or stack another pillow or whatever so your head's higher. And just breathe here for a moment. So when you breathe in, feel the difference in your rib cage, how one side of your rib cage fills faster than the other, and the weight of your rib cage presses down on the block. That's going to be a clear sign of there's some level of imbalance in your upper body and also down into your pelvis. Don't try to change it yet. I haven't explained how, but just be aware of it. And then as you're breathing, become aware of the weight of your hips on the floor and which hip presses hardest into the floor. Which hip presses harder than the other. Don't try to change it, just be aware of it. And you might not notice just based on like, you know, pressure of your hip, but you also might kind of feel like, well, this part of the skin of my flesh touches the floor and on the other side it doesn't, you know. If one hip's gripped up, the flesh is going to pull up higher than the hip that's totally relaxed, and the butt and the glute muscles. So one of the ways we start kind of taking the back muscles out of the equation in a sense, or at least make them so they're neutral, is we want to take the twist or lean out of it that is kind of scoliotic in nature to make our pelvis feel a little more free in our seated poses. So whatever side of your rib cage is pressing harder into the block, and if you can't tell, you can try them both and figure out which it is. Whatever side of your rib cage is pressing harder into the block, don't restrict your breathing, don't push your shoulders down, but try to press that side of the rib cage into the block harder. So if your right ribs are pressing harder into the block, it's going to sound counterintuitive, press that right side down more and then try to breathe into that. What this does is it directs your breath to not just be locked to the front abdominis, but it makes it lift up higher towards the top of the lungs, and it also starts encouraging the abdominal wall, the hip, the muscles through the pelvis, abdominal wall to push your back more equally, to stabilize that side of the spine a little more. And even though this is not a deep ab flex, it's just how we're built. To press down like that requires some abdominal flexion. And then be aware of it through the whole side of your back. So if you're pressing, say, your left side down, don't just press the part of the block nearest the shoulder, press the whole length of that block or the side of your back down into that block as much as you can. And it's going to feel weird because feels like you might be encouraging an imbalance, but you're really not, because what you're encouraging is actually the muscles that are already gripped to have to flatten and wide and release, because now the abdominal wall is engaged a little bit and the lateral muscles are engaged. And just breathe into it. This is something you kind of get into and you hold a bit. Great. So now keep moving that side of your rib cage down in the block. Feel your hips. If you feel one hip presses harder into the floor than the other, press that hip down even more. And it's likely to be opposite of your rib cage. Apologies for the barky dog. So continue to press whatever side of the rib cage that when you relax feels heaviest on the blocks, push it harder, and whatever hip feels heaviest on the floor, push it harder. And then bring your legs into it, bring your feet together, heels together like Tadasana, because what you're really doing is practicing a form of Tadasana on the floor right now. Bring your feet together and legs together. Stretch your heels away from you, not by flexing your foot back, but stretch the back side of your leg away towards the heel so that the top muscle of the leg, your quadricep, the large thigh muscle, can help engage and press that hip down. Stretch the heels away from you, lengthen the back side of the leg, press the thigh hip down. Still moving the ribs down, or whatever side is already pressing hardest into the floor. Good. Bend both knees. Take both feet flat to the floor. Continue. Take a second. Don't press anything down. Disengage and feel how your body kind of tilts a little bit. You might feel a difference in the rib cage now, one side to the other of the hips. Take a breath and then, with your knees bent, your feet flat to the floor, press that rib down, or that side of the rib cage down that's not, or that's already pressing harder. Press it down more to start to balance it out. And then feel your hips. Whichever hip presses hardest into the floor, press that hip down again. And then draw your right knee towards your chest. Still trying to keep the rib cage and hip pressing down forward. Draw your right knee towards your chest as deep as you can. But no hands. Thank you. No hands. I see all these hands coming up. Fine. Don't do it. Push your hips down on their own strength. Push whatever side of the rib cage was already hardest into the block harder, and pull the right knee as close as you can. Make that quad burn a little bit. Because what you're doing is you're lengthening your spine, having your abdominals and your quads flex to pull all the pelvis muscles, the inner groin and hip muscles. It may not feel like a deep stretch. You might feel like you're getting tired or a Charlie horse, but trust me, there's stuff happening in there that's not about the greater muscle or the intensity of the stretch. You're rebalancing very small fascial muscle, spinal muscle, and things like that. Go ahead and plant your right foot to the floor. Pull your left knee towards your chest. We're doing an old school Dustin therapy class from 4 or 5 years ago. Now notice when you pull that left leg up, if there's a different from the right side. Try to do the best you can to keep working whatever hip and rib that was already pressing into the block and floor harder, and work that left thigh to come in. Because if you feel a difference one side to the other, that thigh being harder to lift or whichever one is harder to pick up is a pretty clear sign of imbalance in pelvic muscle, abdominal muscle, and of course your back shoulders are going to respond, and then your knees are going to respond. Pelvis imbalanced, your knees are going to hurt. Just like your shoulders are out of whack, your elbows are going to hurt. One of my students, big tennis player, just, now figured out he gets tennis elbow because his shoulders are out of whack. Try to pull both knees towards your stomach. Work the hips down, work the ribs down into the block, pull those thighs in tight. Try to squeeze your thighs tight together too, just like the Tadasana you were doing earlier. So now you're kind of just in a, you're kind of just doing like a weird version of Uttanasana. So let's make it full Uttanasana. Keep your knees pulling tight to your belly. Stretch your arms straight up to the ceiling, pointing up above you. and then stretch them overhead so your biceps stretch alongside your ears. Stretch your arms away from your hips. Stretch your hips away from your arms and down into the floor, and then pull your thighs in tight. So you are in Supta Uttanasana, supine chair pose. You're getting all the back extension work, you're getting the core work without, like, you know, the feeling of coming up of keying your teacher's car. Nah, Tristan says, man, better not key my car, lady. The kids are, lady. Keep your knees up for a few more moments. Take a few deep breaths. Work your ribs, work your hips down. Okay. Take your right hand to the outside of your left knee. Pull both legs to the right. Stretch your left arm still overhead, lengthening the hips away from the arm away from the hips. Your left hip will come up off the floor. Pull the legs across to the right in a twist. But try to work your right ribs harder down into the block. Don't try to push your left shoulder, left ribs down. They may come up a little bit, but push your right ribs harder down. Trust me on this. Don't let your shoulder come up. Don't make this about your neck, but try to push your rib cage down from the back muscle. And your legs may not go all the way to the floor, but if they do, great. Try to keep your back on the blocks, but work that right rib cage down more. What you're doing is you're tricking your lateral muscles into stabilizing your, and core muscles to stabilizing your upper back from a rotation. So this is very much that pose where you're, Uttanasana, you take one arm to the outside of the knee and then the other. Bring your knees back up, stretch your right arm back overhead, back to the Supta Uttanasana. Take your left hand to the outside of the right knee. Pull the legs across. When you start to go across, you got to push that left hip down because it's the hip hardest into the floor. You got to work those left ribs down because they're the ribs hardest into the block. Push them down more. Breathe. Take a nice deep breath. Bring your body up. Stretch your arms back overhead. Go ahead, put your feet on the floor for a moment. Stretch your legs out straight. Bring your arms down alongside your body or out to the side, kind of in the modified Tadasana we're in. We won't be on the blocks much longer. For some of us that have a lot of upper back neck issues, this can be very good. You just don't want to do it forever because the muscles can get tight. So don't push down on anything, but relax into laying here for a second and just breathe and see if there's a difference from earlier to now. What's the difference for you? Both sides. Tristan says both sides of her rib cage are on the block. So if there's some release to her upper back, what about your hips? Tristan says they're a little bit more balanced now. So Tristan says the feedback for her is both sides are now stable because now you use the core muscles and everything and you trick the core muscles into working so the back muscles can reset. So when we have a lot of issues like that, we're trying to get into poses that are new for us. The work isn't always just keep pushing the hard and flexible parts. Go to some other parts that need to work to stabilize it. If you can't get something to move, support yourself in some other way so that part feels like it can move. Sit on up for a moment. Sit up for a second, get off the blocks, gives your back a rest. Go ahead and sit with your shins crossed, one in front of the other, right in front of left, let's say, just like you were at the very start of class. Take your right hand to the outside of your left knee. Just take your left hand, leave it on your left hip, and twist to your left as much as you can. Even though you may not be able to touch it, take your left hand behind you to your lower back. Slide your left hand around towards the right hip. Like you're trying to move your left arm behind you as far as you can go and even wrap it around to touch the right thigh one day. Push your feet hard into the floor like you're going to fall back. So you have to push your hips down into the floor to lift yourself up. And then twist any degree. Just take a few breaths into that. Different from the twist on the floor, right? Now you're working different muscles to create the spinal twist, whereas before you used your legs going across in traction and your core muscle to keep your back working. Now you're trying to use your back. So untwist, go to the left. This will make sense here in a little while. We'll add to it. Take your left hand to the right knee. Go twist to the right. Take your right hand back behind you. Climb your right hand around your back towards your thigh. If it touches the thigh, great. If it doesn't, great. You still move it that direction. Take a few breaths. Push your hips down, push your feet into the floor, and then push your hips into the floor to make the work have to come from at least your core or your back. At least the rotational part. The legs are stabilizing and lifting you. Good. Untwist. Cross your shins differently, so now the opposite shin is in front. We'll twist to each side here just to make sure we're even. This will give your back another moment of rest before we go back to the block, because there's still more to do from there. Take your left hand to your right knee. Twist to your right, taking your right hand back behind you to the left hip. Take a few moments breathing into this, pushing your feet down, pushing your hips down. So you're still working some of the same habits we've done in the past weeks. It's called learning, bringing back, experiencing, and experimenting with stuff from before to now, so that you really kind of learn that the tools you learn aren't just for that one individual moment. They might be useful in bigger things. That's how you really get into experimenting and using giving yourself a guide system for really discovering some interesting things about the yoga poses and yourself. Twist the other way, keep your legs as they are. Right hand to left knee, left hand reaches behind you. It's hard twisting seated, isn't it? A lot of muscle got to move. This okay on your body, Katie? Great. Go ahead, untwist. So just sitting there with your shins crossed, your left shin in front of your right. Stay where you are. Feel your hips on the floor. Is one hip pressing down harder than the other? And you're not sitting on anything unless you put something there on your own, which is fine. But just be aware if one hip's pressing harder into the floor than the other. If you feel one hip pressing harder down, push it even harder into the floor. Notice you get a little bit of lift. Then stop pressing it down, feel your body drop, and then try to press the hip into the floor that's not pressing hardest right out the gate. And notice you just kind of lean or you twist to one side. Because what happens is that side that's not touching the ground, that side's tight. It's pulling up away from the floor. The side that's already pushing hardest into the floor in this position is the looser side. So you want to use that as the stabilizing point to let the other side relax. So for me, if I'm sitting here with my left shin crossed in front of my right, my left hip presses down harder. So if I push my right hip down, I actually contract deeper on the right side and I lean to my right. If I push my left hip down, I lift up taller. Tristan, I think, shares a similar thing. So being aware of that, that you're not trying to create the most stimulation of connection. Use the connection you got to create openness. All right, so go ahead, lay back on the blocks. It's the same theory as when you're learning this on the block. Stretch your arms out wide, lay back, head supported. If you want to work your upper back a little bit more, carefully, gently, you can reduce the height of the thing under your head a little bit so you get more extension of the upper back and neck. This isn't about your head being like super comfy. It needs to, you know, be safe and comfortable, but not like swaddled. Move your ribs into the block. Whichever set of ribs presses hardest into the block when you lay down, press it harder. But feel your hips. Whichever hip presses hardest into the floor, press it harder. Usually it's opposite of the ribs. Usually, it's not always going to be true. Bend both knees, plant both feet flat to the floor. Pull your feet as close as you can under their own strength to your glutes. Go up on your tiptoes. Push your heel, not your butt. Don't pick your butt up. Don't ask for that. Pick your heels up. Push your heels together and let your knees fall wide with your heels up as much as you can into Baddha Konasana. Push your heels together and then push your heels down into the floor in that order. So push your feet together, push your heels down into the floor so you're in Supta Baddha, and then notice what changed in your hips and in your ribs. You probably gripped in the groin or in your back to try and make your legs fire. Flex the quad, the top side of the leg, the thickest part of the leg, and press down through the feet. And then whatever hip is pressing hardest into the floor, press it harder so the other one gets a chance to release. And then on your rib cage, whichever side is pressing harder, press it more. Stretch both arms overhead, lengthening the arms away from the feet. Push down through the heel and drag your heels away from your groin. Don't actually slide them, but try to drag the yoga mat and the floor away from your groin. You get this full extension, this variation of fish pose, Matsyendrasana. Be active in the rib cage and in your hips. This isn't about going for like super long fish. This is like we're going for even fish. Swedish fish, I don't know. Swedish fish. Candy that so confusing. I'm sure you do. Old lady. No. So now, keep your hips and back working. Pick your heels up off the floor as high as you can, but your toes stay down on the floor. So your pinky toe will stay on the floor. And it's like you're trying to get your big toe to the floor and roll your heel up away from the floor. Now your knees may lift up a little bit when you do this. That's fine, but push your feet hard together. Push your hips into the floor. Whichever hip was pressing hardest, press it more. This does not mean overflex your glutes, but it means push down through that pelvis. Same for your rib cage, and then stretch your arms longer. Now, whichever arm is hanging on the floor the heaviest, press it down harder too. Because one shoulder being out of alignment, because leaning on your desk or whatever can throw the other one off too. Heels up, toes down, feet push in. Take a couple breaths. Bring your arms out of the pose. Bring your heels down to the floor. Bring your knees together, feet flat to the floor. Slide your right foot under your left thigh. And let your right knee fall towards the floor. Point your right foot and press your right foot harder into the floor. Check your hips. Whatever hip is pressing harder into the floor, press it more. Same for your ribs and your back. Now draw your left knee to your chest under its own strength, no hands, as hard as you can. Work the right foot, work your hips, work your back. This will be hard. Put your left foot on the floor, bring your right foot out of the pose, keep your hips and back, check in with them after you move your leg, reset your balance. Slide your left foot under the right thigh. Let your knee go down. Push your left foot into the floor, check your hips, whatever hip's pressing the hardest now, press it more, and then you're back. Now pull your right knee towards your chest under the strength of its own leg. Take a few breaths. Take the leg out. Right foot down, left leg out of the pose. Slide your right foot under your left thigh again. Push your right foot into the floor. This next part's the challenging part. I would like for, if you, I'm going to give you an option if you can't do this. Pick your left foot up and place your left foot on your right thigh bone. Do not put it on your calf or your knee or your foot. Put it on your thigh. Point the left foot. And then let your left knee fall towards the floor. You're in like a souped up half lotus. Let your left knee fall to the floor, Katie. Put your left foot on your right thigh, Katie. Point the foot and then let your left knee fall to the floor. To the left. Yeah, as much as you can without hurting your hip. So if it needs to point up, that's okay. So push your right foot down so your right thigh flexes a little. Then push your left foot down into the right thigh. Not enough to push the knee down. You're not trying to use the left leg to like force the pose. What you're doing is you're using the strength of your right thigh and the strength of your left thigh to kind of work the inner parts of the pelvis in this pose. It's a very active pose. Then work your ribs, which side presses hardest into the block. And now stretch your arms overhead, lengthening your arms away from your hips. Take a few breaths. You can do a lot from supine. There's a lot of stuff you can do in a supine pose. Go ahead, take the legs out of the pose. Left foot under right thigh. Let your left knee fall towards the floor. Press your left foot down. Pick your right foot up, place your right foot on your left thigh. Let your right knee fall towards the floor. Point both feet. Push the left foot down first so you feel the right thigh flex and lift a little bit. That's correct. Then press your right foot down into the flexed left thigh. If you press it down to an unengaged left leg, you're pushing on connective tissue and joint. Don't do that to yourself. Then check your ribs, work whichever rib needs to get in the pose, and then stretch your arms longer, lengthen away from the opening hip. Take a few breaths. You're going to feel the hip groin open, some spaces that's actually kind of hard to do in full upright seated poses. That's why eventually in full lotus, you lay back in it. All right, bring your feet out of the pose. Pull both knees to your body. Take your right hand to the outside of your left knee again. Pull the right leg across, pushing your right ribs down as you, your shoulder coming up. Let your right shoulder stay down. Pull the legs across to the right side, rolling onto the right hip. If your knees go to the floor, great. If not, it's not a big deal. Push your right rib cage down, stretch your left arm long. Stretch your left hip away from your left arm. So that left hip has to roll away from your arm, from your side body. Try that for a moment. Switch sides, twist the other way, taking your legs up first. Put your arms, left hand to the outside of the right knee. Keep your thighs together. Roll to the left. Work your left ribs down, and then twist based on your ability to keep your left back muscles engaged, because this is where your core gets to work. Take a few deep breaths. Bring your body up. Sit up out of the pose. So now sit on something so there's some height to your hips, and hopefully it's firm. So if you have a yoga block to sit on, or some block of wood or whatever, just something you can sit on that's fairly firm. Even 2 blankets folded up that are firmer can be nice. I prefer blocks because blocks aren't going to lie to you about the balance of your hips like a blanket or a pillow. Sit on a block, stretch both legs straight out in front of you. One of the things we're doing with a lot of this work is using our legs to help get us settled into seated poses more than just our arms, right? A lot of classes, you take your arms behind you and you twist, or you manipulate your legs with your arms all the time. That's all good and well, but there is a point where the legs have to have the practice of being active in these poses to create the lifted spine, the open hip. So from here, just push your heels down, then feel which heel is pressing harder into the floor already. Press it harder, and then do the same for your hips. What hip's pressing hardest into your support? For me, it's my left. So I got to press my right heel and then my left hip down. My spine lifts. You don't have a wall for your back, so you just got to kind of remember what it was like laying down. So you got to pull that side into it. And then just stretch both arms up. So Dandasana. Interlace your fingers, turn both palms up. Work your feet, work your hips, and then go right to your sacral plate and push it forward towards your groin. So your whole spine has to activate up. Your abdominals flex to do the pose. Feel that, huh? Tristan says, uh-huh. Tristan say what? Right. Change the lacing of your fingers so it's the opposite set of fingers. Lift up both the feet, the hips, the back, and then move your sacral plate forward as if someone or I was pushing my foot right on your SI joint towards your groin. Take a few breaths, work to pose. All right, bring the arms down. So now, bend both knees on their own strength. Hold them in, slide your right foot under your left thigh. Point the toes. Pick up your left foot, lay it on your right thigh near the knee. Same thing we've been doing. Turn towards. So with your right foot under your left thigh, point the foot, push the foot into the floor. With your left foot up on your right thigh near the knee, push your foot into the thigh. But don't push your left leg down into the right leg unless it's active. So really be cognizant when you're pushing that right foot down that your right thigh muscle is very flexed and strong. So then when you push your left foot down into it, the work happens in your hips and back. Your back gets a lift from it. So just experiment for a second, gently, because knees are tough. Don't work your left leg. Just let it be passive, like we've done the pose. I was taught to do it wrongly. And then push your left foot down on it and see how it makes your spine kind of lean one way. Doesn't feel good, does it? No, but we keep pushing that like that's the balance point. Don't push. Work the root of the pose first. Push your right foot down, that makes the right thigh flex. And then push your left thigh foot down into that right active thigh. Your left thigh will fire, your spine lifts. So half lotus, right? We've been working this, that's fine. The reclining part from upright is more challenging than you would think. Falling back into these poses from seated is not easy. Now we're not going all the way down for obvious reasons. You're elevated. You need to work on this at home a little bit. But take both hands behind you onto the floor and try to work your legs and walk your hands farther away from you so you recline back and feel the pull and the change that happens inside the hips. Notice one hip instantly comes up off the block almost and the other presses down into it. Push that one harder, whichever one that is, probably you're right, so that left side eventually drops. You'll notice if you push that left foot down into the right thigh, this knee comes down super easy over time. This is teaching suppleness of that pelvis and groin and the knee joint. I could sit here and pull Tristan's knee all the way down to the floor super easy without any tension on her joints. Now, so this action, this recline back from this active leg position, actually leaves all this inner pelvic groin stuff in these areas that can get really torqued up when we do too much sitting. Bring your body up, switch your legs, stretch them out on their own strength, go to Dandasana, straight legged. Bend your knees on their own strength. Try to push your hips down, reset, kind of move through that thing where you're always checking in, which hip's harder into the floor. Push it down and then bend your legs. So you're using your core and legs. You're not pulling with your groin or your back. Slide your left foot under the right, point the foot, and then pull the right foot up on top of the left. Point both feet. Remember, a pointed foot looks like this. It's not this. It's this. No, yes. Right angle, wrong angle. That's actually not true. The flexes. Point your left foot, push your left foot harder into the floor so you feel the left quad engage. Keep it engaged. Actively pushing that foot down. And then try pushing your right foot down into that. So this has to work inside the whole of the hip structure. We're not going to have you do the experiment of pushing the top foot down into an unengaged leg. That's just silly. We're not going to waste our time. Take both hands back behind you and lay back. Walk them back as far as you want. But work your legs because your legs are the root that's going to keep you stable. And then whatever hip's pressing harder into the hardest into the block, press it harder. Not back, down, there. And then let yourself going back be a stretch of the upper body away from the knees. This is a great way to help really open the knee joint in the lower back and the inner groin without it being about like just putting torque on those points. Because most of the time, a lot of torque on those points doesn't do anything because they're tight because they're protecting something from another large muscle being out of balance or whack. You want to get to this. What I've seen over 17 years of doing therapeutics, it's almost never that point that's the symptom. There's like all stuff that's not supporting it. It's overworked. Like most of us, right? Most of us break down when we're overworked. Not that we're lazy, we're too worked. Anyone that sticks around in my classes isn't lazy. Right? I know the bedrock of all of you is strong and determined because you're still in my class. All right, bring your body up. Stretch your legs out to Dandasana. Come off your block, lay down on your mat, stretch your legs out. Have Savasana. have a blanket for your head or a bolster for your knees. Take your time, get really comfortable. No reason not to. Now, the reason you're getting a little longer is because Savasana can be active too in a way. There's a way to prep, sit up, and then learn something from it. So once you're laying down, I'll give you another 30 seconds before I start the next part. So while you're here, feel the back side of your body and feel what side of the body presses harder into the floor. And for a moment, starting with your legs, which leg presses hardest into the floor? What feels heaviest on the floor? Press it harder for a moment. Now, when you did that, did your other leg flex? Let your legs relax, feel the weight of your legs again on the floor, and only work the leg that's already pressing harder into the floor. Press it down a little bit more. Then go to your hips. Whatever hip is pressing hardest into the floor, press it down a little more. It's probably opposite of the leg. And then your back, upper, like rib cage and up to the shoulder blades. What side of your back is pressing hardest into the floor by weight? Press it down more. And then undo your neck. Don't worry about your neck. Don't worry about the back of your head. Don't tuck your chin. Don't do any of that. Just let your neck head be free. And then if you lost your legs because you got to your ribs and you started thinking about your head, go to your feet, work from your feet up through the hips, hips to the shoulders, and then breathe into that flat and neutral in Savasana for like until I say stop. Just be active. This is a pose thing to start to teach the body to let go of certain muscle habits and movements. So whatever leg was laying heaviest on the floor, press that heel down more. Whatever hip was heaviest into the floor, press it down. Whatever side of your back was pressing into the floor, heaviest on the floor, press it down hard. You can even do it with your hands and arms, but I wouldn't, because it's a little too much. It's easy to overwork your shoulder and neck in this case. We'll save that for a different day. So just breathe, work the pose, a few more seconds. Feel it takes a lot of muscle work to do that, because that muscle that is firing is the muscle that's normally loose and unengaged compared to the stuff that's tight. So take a nice deep breath, exhale, now let it all relax and kind of feel the difference. Interesting. It starts to allow your body to kind of untwist. Right? So now, my friends, in a Savasana that's kind of set up where you just didn't throw yourself onto the ground and say, do it. If you went into it with a certain kind of awareness and care for yourself, it was a practice of taking the extra time for you. That's how you reclaim your energy. Like I said at the start of class, we all have those things that go through our head all the time that isn't what we want, isn't what we care about. So now you even took time to put energy into your rest. So my friends, for the next couple minutes, the deep breath in, the slow breath out. Rest and enjoy the fruits of your yogic practice. Take a nice deep breath in. Bend the knees, roll the body to the side. Slowly up you come. Till we meet again, namaste.